Homecoming and shadows. The scorching afternoon sun hung high over the city as Darius Carter stepped off the train, a well-worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The weight was familiar, comforting, though lighter than the gear he had carried on his deployments. After 2 decades of service as a Marine, the battlefield had become second nature to him. But today, he wasn't returning from a war zone. Today, he was coming home. His sharp eyes, trained to scan for threats, instinctively swept across the crowded station. Years of battle had ingrained a habit of constant vigilance, even in a seemingly safe environment. The station was alive with movement, people hurrying to their destinations, families reuniting, vendors calling out their wares. It was a symphony of civilian life, one he had not yet adjusted to. Standing near the exit, waiting for him, was Monique Carter. At 46, she was still the strong-willed, beautiful woman he had married, but time and hardship had taken their toll. Her frame was fuller than he remembered, the stress of his deployments and her ongoing health struggles apparent in the way she held herself. But when their eyes met, her face lit up, and for the first time in months, the tension in his chest eased. "Darius," she called out, her voice filled with relief and emotion. He dropped his bag and caught her in a tight embrace. She felt warm, real. After so many months of distance, of letters and fleeting phone calls, he was finally holding his wife again. "It's good to be home," he murmured into her hair. She clung to him, her fingers gripping the back of his uniform as if afraid he would disappear again. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but she smiled anyway. "I missed you so much," she whispered. "I missed you too," he replied gruffly, his voice thick with emotion. Monique wiped her eyes and placed a hand on his chest. "Are you okay?" "I mean really okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning him as if looking for unseen wounds. Darius hesitated, then decided on honesty. He lifted his shirt slightly to reveal a fresh scar along his ribs, the skin still slightly pink. "Took a bullet," he said matter-of-factly. "Grazed me. Nothing serious, but the doc ordered 3 months of rest." Monique's face paled. "Darius, I'm fine," he reassured her, covering her hand with his own. "Just need some time to heal." She exhaled sharply, nodding. "All right, but you're not going to be doing anything reckless, understand? No heavy lifting, no running around." Darius smirked. "You trying to keep me on house arrest?" "If I have to," she shot back, arching a brow. "Now, let's get you home." They made their way to the parking lot where their old sedan sat waiting, the paint slightly faded but still running strong. As they got in, Darius slid into the driver's seat out of habit, adjusting the mirrors before starting the engine. As they pulled out onto the road, Monique glanced at him hesitantly. "You noticed, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Darius frowned. "Noticed what?" She let out a slow breath, shifting uncomfortably. "My weight." Darius was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I noticed," he admitted, his tone neutral. "But I also know you've been dealing with health issues. It's not just diet, it's your hypothyroidism." Monique's shoulders relaxed slightly, but there was still sadness in her eyes. "I've been trying, Darius. I really have. But it's been hard. And people have been cruel." Darius's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "People?" he echoed, his voice edged with a dangerous calm. "Who?" She shook her head. "Just some neighbors, strangers at the grocery store, even some coworkers. It's not just about my weight, Darius. It's everything. The neighborhood feels different. There's been trouble." Darius narrowed his eyes. "Trouble? What kind of trouble?" Monique hesitated. "Some people in the neighborhood are scared. There's been talk about a gang moving in, a biker gang." Darius's jaw clenched. "And they've been harassing you?" "Not directly," she admitted, "but they've been scaring people, vandalizing homes, threatening shop owners. More and more people are leaving because they don't feel safe anymore." Darius exhaled sharply, the anger simmering beneath his skin. Why didn't you tell me about this before? Monique looked away, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. Because you were already dealing with enough. I didn't want you to worry. Darius didn't respond immediately. He understood why she hadn't told him. But now that he was home, there was no way he could ignore it. As they drove through their neighborhood, he scanned the streets, looking for signs of the unease Monique had described. The houses looked the same, but something felt off. There were more boarded-up windows than he remembered, fewer people out on their porches, a quietness that felt unnatural. They stopped at a red light near a McDonald's, and Darius's stomach growled. He chuckled lightly. You know, I haven't had fast food in months. What do you say we stop for a quick bite? Monique hesitated. Are you sure? You always complain about fast food. Darius shrugged. What can I say? I'm craving a burger. Monique smiled softly. All right. One meal won't hurt. They pulled into the McDonald's parking lot, the golden arches glowing in the early evening light. As they stepped inside, the scent of fries and grilled beef filled the air. Darius motioned toward a booth near the window. Go grab a seat. I'll get our food. Monique nodded, making her way to the table while Darius stepped up to the counter. As he placed their order, he kept an eye on her, his protective instincts always on alert. And then he saw them. Two men, clad in leather biker vests, sat a few tables away. Their eyes were locked on Monique, their mouths twisting into sneers. One of them elbowed the other, whispering something that made them both laugh. Then they got up. Darius's heart rate spiked. They were moving toward Monique. Before he could step away from the counter, he heard the first insult. Damn, lady. You sure you ain't eating for three? Monique stiffened, her hands clenching into fists on the table. The second biker snickered. Or maybe five. Darius saw Monique swallow hard, her lips pressing together. He knew that look. She was trying to stay calm, trying to ignore them. But they weren't done. One of them stepped closer, leering. Hey, sweetheart, don't take it the wrong way. We're just concerned for your health. I mean, your heart's gotta be working overtime carrying all that, huh? The other one cackled, slapping his friend on the back. Shit, I bet she leaves cracks in the pavement when she walks. Monique's knuckles turned white against the table. Darius moved. Slow, deliberate steps, a predator closing in on his prey. The bikers were too busy laughing to notice him until he was right behind them. The moment their eyes met his, their smirks faltered. Because what they didn't realize, what they couldn't possibly know, was that Monique Carter's husband wasn't just a man. He was a Marine. And they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. The wrong target. A thick silence settled over the McDonald's dining area. The air, once filled with the casual hum of conversations and the sizzling scent of fryer oil, now crackled with tension. The two bikers had been laughing a second ago, their sneers twisted with the kind of arrogance only bullies carried. But now, their laughter had died in their throats. The presence looming behind them had suffocated their bravado in an instant. Darius stood tall, broad-shouldered, his military physique still commanding despite the months of recovery. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone sucked the air out of the room. One of the bikers, thick-necked, his arms wrapped in tattoos of skulls and serpents, turned first, looking over his shoulder. His smirk twitched, his breath catching in his throat. Darius's gaze was like a knife pressing against his skin, cold, unwavering, and promising pain. The second biker, a wiry man with greasy hair and yellowed teeth, followed suit, his chuckles dying as he took in the hard, unreadable expression on Darius's face. Monique, still seated, had her jaw clenched. She'd faced insults before. She'd been through worse. But something about having her husband here, standing like a shield between her and these men, made the moment feel different. Made it feel heavier. Darius slowly set down the McDonald's tray in front of Monique, as if the bikers weren't even worth breaking his stride. Then he straightened to his full height, his shadow swallowing the space between them. His voice was calm, measured, but there was no mistaking the steel underneath it. "Say it again." The thick-necked biker hesitated, his bravado cracking like thin glass. Darius took a step forward. "Go on, say it again." The McDonald's cashier and a few other customers stopped mid-bite, sensing the shift in the air. A woman holding a milkshake in the corner watched wide-eyed, while an elderly couple by the window subtly moved their tray aside, as if preparing to leave in case things escalated. The biker with the tattoos cleared his throat, squaring his shoulders, trying to recover. "Ain't nothing to say, man. Just some friendly talk." Darius exhaled sharply through his nose. Wrong answer. Faster than the biker could react, Darius grabbed the back of his vest, yanking him off balance. The motion sent the man stumbling into the table, his drink toppling over, soda spilling across the floor. "Hey!" the wiry one barked, reaching for his friend. Darius's voice dropped an octave lower, cutting through the noise like a gunshot. "You see a woman sitting by herself, enjoying her meal, and you think that's an invitation to spew your filth. You think it makes you men." The tattooed biker struggled to push himself upright, but Darius's grip was like iron. The wiry one, the loudmouth, tried to puff himself up. "Hey, man, relax. No need to." Darius didn't even let him finish. His gaze snapped to the wiry biker like a sniper locking onto a target. "I don't recall asking you to speak." Silence. The man swallowed, his bravado evaporating. Darius leaned in slightly, his voice now a whisper. "You want to disrespect my wife in public. That tells me two things. One, you're not a real man, because a real man wouldn't waste his breath on something so pathetic. And two, you've never been hit by someone like me before." The wiry biker instinctively stepped back. Darius didn't move. He didn't need to. His body, his voice, his very presence made it clear this was not a fight they wanted. The tattooed one finally found his footing, standing straight again, his face twisted in rage. But beneath the anger was fear. And in that fear was something Darius had seen before, something he recognized in weak men who picked on those they assumed couldn't fight back. Doubt. That was all he needed. Monique placed her hand on his arm. "Darius," she said softly, a quiet plea. She didn't want this to escalate. Not here. Darius let out a slow breath through his nose, steadying himself. Then, just as quickly as it started, he let go of the biker's vest, brushing his hands off as if he'd just handled something foul. He tilted his head toward the door. "Leave." The tattooed biker hesitated, his pride still flaring, but one glance at Darius's unmoving stance, the way his muscles coiled like a panther ready to strike, made the decision for him. The wiry one muttered under his breath, "Let's go, man." They turned, stiff-legged, their steps quick but trying not to look like they were running. As they reached the door, the tattooed biker couldn't help himself. He threw one last glare over his shoulder. "This ain't over." Darius smirked. "It never is." And with that, they were gone. The restaurant remained still. Even the cashier at the counter, a teenage boy in a too-big uniform, let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Darius finally sat down, his body still wired with tension, but forcing himself to relax. Monique shook her head, looking at him with something between exasperation and admiration. "You couldn't just let them walk away, huh?" Darius smirked slightly, picking up a fry. "Nope." Monique sighed, but there was something fond in her voice. "You always did have a way of making a scene." Darius popped the fry into his mouth. "And you always did attract trouble." Monique rolled her eyes but laughed. The moment of peace, however, was short-lived. From the parking lot outside, the roar of multiple motorcycles echoed through the air. Darius's chewing slowed. Monique stiffened. "Please tell me that's just some other bikers." Darius didn't need to look. He already knew the answer. Slowly, he turned his head toward the window. A line of motorcycles had pulled up just outside. 5. No, 6. The two bikers he had just sent packing were standing next to a much larger man, a broad-shouldered figure with a weathered face, his leather vest marked with a serpent coiled around a skull. The insignia was instantly recognizable. Hell Mask Riders. Darius's lips pressed into a thin line. You've got to be kidding me. Monique reached for his hand under the table. Darius, what do we do? Darius finished his fry. Slowly, calmly. He wiped his hands with a napkin, pushing his chair back. Monique's grip on his wrist tightened. Darius. He looked at her, squeezing her hand gently. Stay here and finish your meal. Monique's breath hitched. You're not going out there alone. Darius's eyes flicked to the group outside, then back to her. They're the ones who should be worried. Without another word, he rose to his full height and walked toward the door. Every step was measured, every heartbeat steady. Because the bikers had made a mistake tonight, they assumed they were dealing with an ordinary man. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, was that they had just challenged a warrior. And they were about to learn what that meant. The hard way. No retreat, no surrender. The glass door of McDonald's swung shut behind Darius as he stepped outside. The warm night air buzzed with the distant hum of traffic, but all he could hear was the deep rumble of motorcycle engines idling in the parking lot. 6 bikers stood in a loose formation, their leather vests marked with the insignia of the Hell Mask Riders, a serpent coiled around a grinning skull. The 2 fools from inside, the wiry one and the tattooed one, stood near the back, their postures tense. They were still licking their wounds from the humiliation they had suffered just moments ago. At the center of the group stood the biggest one of them, a beast of a man, easily 6'4", with a build like a bulldozer and arms thicker than most people's thighs. His beard was streaked with gray, and his face was scarred from a lifetime of violence. Darius knew who he was before he even opened his mouth. Axel Red Thornton, the leader of the Hell Mask Riders. Darius had read about him in the local news reports, a former enforcer for a notorious cartel before starting his own gang. Smart, ruthless, a man who didn't tolerate disrespect, a man who made examples of those who crossed him. And now he was staring directly at Darius. Darius stopped a few feet away, his hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't armed. He didn't need to be. Red's eyes narrowed as he looked him over, sizing him up, measuring him, the way a predator does before deciding whether the fight is worth it. You the one that put hands on my boys? Red asked, his voice gravelly, like a landslide rolling over rock. Darius didn't blink. They disrespected my wife. They learned a lesson. Red smirked. That right. And what lesson do you think they learned, Marine? Darius didn't flinch. That actions have consequences. The bikers chuckled lowly, a mocking sound that held the promise of violence. Red, however, remained still, watching Darius with the patience of a hunter. You must think you're a real tough son of a bitch, Red said, taking a step forward. Ain't many men willing to stand up to us. That takes balls. Darius met his gaze, unshaken. Then maybe you should be asking yourself why I'm not scared of you. A flicker of amusement passed through Red's eyes, but it was short-lived. You made my men look weak inside that restaurant. I don't tolerate weakness. Darius exhaled through his nose. Then you should have raised better men. The bikers bristled. One of them, a shorter, stocky man with a missing front tooth, stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Boss, let me handle this son of a... Red held up a hand, cutting him off. The biker immediately fell silent. They feared him more than they wanted to fight. That told Darius everything he needed to know. Red tilted his head. You ever heard of us, Marine? Darius's lips curled into the barest hint of a smirk. I did my homework before I got home. Then you know we run this town. Darius didn't move. Not anymore. A slow, ominous silence settled over the parking lot. Red's expression darkened. You see, that's the thing, Marine. You and your wife. You're nothing. You don't get to walk in here and decide how things work. Darius finally crossed his arms, his voice calm, steady. And yet, here I am. The bikers shifted uncomfortably. They were used to being feared, used to people cowering, backing down, but Darius wasn't giving them an inch. Red's jaw tightened. You think this is a game? He motioned to his men. There's 6 of us, just one of you. Darius tilted his head slightly. You sure about that? Red frowned. Darius took a slow step to the side, revealing the glass windows of the McDonald's behind him. Where Monique stood, her phone raised, camera recording. And not just her. Several customers inside had their phones out too. The realization hit the bikers like a punch to the gut. They hadn't just confronted a lone man. They had walked straight into the modern battlefield. The court of public opinion. See, here's the thing, Darius continued, his voice unwavering. You could jump me right now. You could try to put me down. But I guarantee you this video would go viral before you even make it home. He nodded toward Monique. And then suddenly, the police have to take action. The FBI starts watching you. The entire country knows exactly who you are. Red's eyes darkened, his hands clenching into fists. Darius pressed forward. You wanted a fight. You wanted to teach me a lesson. But I'm not a scared business owner or a kid on the street. I'm a United States Marine. I don't scare easy. I don't back down. And I sure as hell don't take orders from cowards hiding behind numbers. One of the younger bikers muttered, Shit, boss. He's got a point. Red shot him a look that could melt steel. The leader of the Hell Mask Riders stood there for a long moment, his eyes burning into Darius like he was trying to set him on fire through sheer force of will. Then, slowly, Red took a step back. He didn't break eye contact, but he didn't advance either. You just made this personal, he said coldly. Darius gave him a slow nod. Good. Then maybe next time, you'll send real men. The bikers tensed, but Red held up a hand again. Let's go. Without another word, they turned, mounting their motorcycles. The engines roared as they peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching against asphalt. Darius stood there, watching them disappear into the night. Only when the last tail light vanished did he let out a slow breath, rolling the tension out of his shoulders. He turned back toward the restaurant. Monique was already rushing toward him, her face pale, her eyes wide with both fear and admiration. Darius. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. I told you, he murmured. They're the ones who should be scared. She pulled back slightly, searching his face. This isn't over. No, Darius admitted. It's just beginning. Meanwhile, as the motorcycles roared down the highway, Red's hands tightened on the handlebars, his face twisted in barely contained rage. That bastard made us look weak. The wiry biker spat. We should have put him down right then and there. Red said nothing for a moment, his jaw flexing. Then finally, he muttered, Not here. Not now. But soon. He looked into the distance, his eyes narrowing. Find out where he lives, when the devil comes knocking. The ride home was quiet, but the tension sat thick between Darius and Monique. The streets of Hollowbrook Heights, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now felt suffocating. Darius drove with one hand on the wheel, his eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. He had dealt with men like Red before, men who didn't take humiliation lightly. They wouldn't forget tonight. They wouldn't let this slide. Monique sat beside him, arms crossed over her chest. She wasn't shaking anymore, but he could tell she was holding back her emotions, processing everything. They know where we live, she finally said. Darius exhaled sharply through his nose. I know. Monique shook her head. I don't think you do, Darius. These people aren't like the guys you fought overseas. There's no code, no Geneva Conventions. They don't care about rules or honor. You embarrassed them. Darius tightened his grip on the wheel. He knew she was right. Men like Red only understood one language: power. The only way to keep them from coming back was to hit them harder than they expected. But how? As they pulled into their driveway, the street was quiet. Almost too quiet. Their neighborhood had changed while he was gone. The warm, welcoming community he had once known was now laced with an underlying sense of dread. Porch lights were dimmer, doors locked earlier, and people who once waved at each other now walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact. Fear had crept in like a slow-moving fog, suffocating everything in its path. Monique sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'll grab a bag. We should stay at a hotel for the night." "No." She turned, eyes wide. "No." Darius turned off the ignition and faced her. His voice was calm, but firm. "We're not running." Monique let out a bitter laugh. "So what? We just stay here and wait for them to retaliate. Let them torch our house." "No," Darius said again. "We prepare." She looked at him, searching his face, trying to understand what he was thinking. "Prepare for what, Darius?" He opened the car door and stepped out, speaking over his shoulder. "For war." Meanwhile, the Hell Mask Riders weren't just angry. They were furious. Red Thornton sat at the head of the long wooden table inside their clubhouse, a rundown bar on the outskirts of the city where the police knew better than to poke around. The dim lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the peeling walls covered in gang memorabilia, old photos, bullet-ridden leather vests, and knife-slashed banners of rival groups that no longer existed. Around him sat his men, some bruised, some bandaged, but all eager for blood. Crusher was still rubbing his sore ribs, his face twisted in frustration. "That bastard humiliated us, boss, in front of civilians, in front of cameras." Rat, the wiry one, slammed a fist on the table. "We should have stomped him into the pavement. You should have let us finish it right there." Red was silent for a moment, his fingers steepled in front of him. He was thinking, calculating. Finally, he spoke. "You idiots still don't get it." Crusher scowled. "What's there to get?" "He disrespected us, boss." Red's eyes snapped up, burning with quiet rage. "And what would have happened if we jumped him right then and there?" No one answered. Red leaned forward, his voice low, like the growl of a caged animal. "The moment we touched him, that video would have gone viral. The feds would have been knocking on our doors by morning, and we don't have the heat to deal with that right now." Crusher clenched his jaw, but didn't argue. Red leaned back, smirking. No, we don't kill him in a parking lot over a cheeseburger. We do this right." Rat grinned, already liking where this was going. "So what's the plan?" Red's smirk widened. "We make him suffer. We don't just hit him. We hit everything he cares about." He glanced around the table. "I want eyes on him. Find out where he lives, who he talks to, where his wife works. We don't rush this. We make him wish he never set foot back in this town." The men nodded, the tension shifting into something else, something darker. Crusher cracked his knuckles. "He wants a war. We'll give him one." Back at the Carter household, Darius moved with a purpose, grabbing the security equipment from their earlier shopping trip and getting to work. Monique followed him into the living room, watching as he pulled out locks, a CCTV system, tripwire alarms, and motion sensor lights. She crossed her arms. "You had this planned all along, didn't you?" "I had a feeling," he admitted, setting up the first camera by the front door. Monique bit her lip. "And if they show up?" Darius glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "Then they won't leave the way they came." The intensity in his voice sent a chill down her spine. She sat on the couch, watching him work. "Darius, I'm scared." He stopped what he was doing and turned to face her. "I know," he said softly, "but we're not alone." She looked up, confused. Before she could ask what he meant, there was a knock at the door. She tensed. Darius stood up, placing a hand on the small of her back as he guided her behind him. Then he checked the security monitor. The sight made him relax. He opened the door. Standing on the porch, hands in his pockets, was Malik Jones. Monique's shoulders sagged with relief. Malik grinned. What? No hug. Darius smirked, shaking his head as he pulled his old Marine brother into a quick embrace. Took you long enough. Malik stepped inside, glancing around. I see you already got started. We don't have time to waste, Darius said, shutting the door behind him. Monique looked between the two men. So, what now? Darius met Malik's gaze. We take the fight to them. Malik's grin widened. Now that's what I like to hear. Darius looked at the table, where he had spread out maps, police reports, and everything he had gathered about the Hell Mask Riders. They weren't just going to sit and wait. They were going to strike first. Because if Red Thornton wanted war, then Darius Carter was about to give him one. The fight begins. Malik leaned over the table, scanning the maps, police reports, and security footage Darius had pulled up. His sharp eyes flicked between the documents, piecing things together quickly. These guys ain't small time, Malik muttered, rubbing his chin. They'd been expanding for the last 2 years. The police let him get too comfortable. Darius nodded. Exactly. That's why we need to hit them before they come for us. Monique, arms crossed tightly over her chest, let out a shaky breath. I still think we should go to the police. Darius gave her a look, but before he could respond, Malik chuckled darkly. You really think the cops are gonna do something? Malik asked. They have 4 of those bastards in custody just today, and I bet you half of them are already out on bail. Monique hesitated, then sighed. So what then? We fight them ourselves. Darius's voice was steady. Not just fight them. Crush them. Malik smirked. That's why I'm here, brother. Darius nodded, then motioned toward the papers on the table. I spent last night digging into their movements. They run extortion rings out of a few local businesses, but their biggest moneymaker is a garage on the east side. Malik's eyes lit up. Let me guess, they move more than just cars through that place. Exactly, Darius confirmed. Drugs, stolen parts, weapons. If we take out the garage, we cut off a major artery for their operations. Monique's face paled. You're talking about attacking their business. That's not just a message, Darius. That's war. Darius met her gaze. They already declared war. I'm just making sure we win. Monique hesitated, then sighed. What do you need me to do? Darius shook his head. Nothing. I want you to stay here. Stay with the Fredericks across the street. She scowled. I'm not a damned hostage, Darius. He exhaled, stepping closer, cupping her face gently. I know you're not, but I need to focus tonight. I can't do that if I'm worrying about you. Monique studied him, seeing the raw truth in his eyes. He wasn't just being protective. He was being strategic. Finally, she relented with a nod. Fine, but you better come back in one piece. Darius smirked. I always do. A few hours later, the Hell Mask Riders garage. A rusted-out auto shop sat on the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by stacks of old car parts, broken-down motorcycles, and chain-link fences. The neon sign above the building flickered weakly, casting eerie shadows across the oil-stained pavement. Inside, bikers moved in and out of the garage, working under dim fluorescent lights. Some were fixing up bikes, others counting stacks of cash. A few crates in the corner were sealed tight, likely containing something illegal. Darius and Malik sat parked a block away in an old, nondescript truck. From their vantage point, they could see at least 8 bikers in view, likely more inside. This is their hub, Malik whispered. You sure we want to go loud tonight? Darius shook his head. Not yet. First, we sabotage them. Then we send a message. Malik grinned. I like where this is going. Darius reached into the back seat, grabbing a duffel bag filled with tools, zip ties, and an old Marine-issue Ka Bauer knife. Let's get to work. Inside the garage, 30 minutes later. The Hell Mask Riders had no idea two ghosts were moving in their shadows. Darius and Malik had slipped in through the back fence, staying in the blind spots of the security cameras. Years of military training made them practically invisible as they crept between parked motorcycles and stacks of old tires. The first target was the fuel supply. Darius crouched near a stack of red gas canisters, pulling out a small drill. He punched a tiny hole in each one, ensuring the fuel would start leaking out slowly. No one would notice immediately, not until it was too late. Malik, meanwhile, had slid under one of the gang's blacked-out SUVs, slicing through the brake lines. By the time the bikers noticed anything was wrong, it would be chaos. A few of the gang members laughed loudly, drinking beers near the front entrance. Malik whispered, "I say we take at least two of them out. Keep 'em confused." Darius nodded. Silent. Fast. No bodies left behind. Malik moved first, like a phantom. One of the bikers, a younger guy, maybe early 20s, stood by a stack of tires, texting on his phone. He never saw Malik coming. A cloth soaked in chloroform was clamped over his mouth. His eyes widened in panic, but Malik dragged him into the darkness, his struggles fading after a few seconds. Darius moved next. An older biker, standing near a stack of crates, had his back turned. Bad move. Darius crept up behind him, and with one swift motion, slipped a zip tie around his wrists. Before the man could cry out, Darius yanked it tight, cutting off circulation. A quick elbow to the back of the skull sent him into unconsciousness. Two down. No one noticed. Malik smirked. Too easy. Darius nodded toward the crates. Let's see what they're hiding. They'd popped open the lid of one. Inside, stacks of weapons, silencers, high-powered rifles, ammo. Malik let out a low whistle. Well, looks like our biker friends are planning something big. Darius frowned. Then we just made this personal. He pulled out a single bullet, rolling it between his fingers. Then he grabbed a small piece of paper from his pocket and scribbled something down. Malik raised a brow. What are you doing? Darius tucked the bullet and the note into the top of the crate. A warning. A promise. They weren't just going to fight back. They were going to end this. Darius and Malik slipped back into the darkness, disappearing before anyone realized they were there. The Hell Mask Riders wouldn't know what hit them. The next morning, at the garage, the sun had barely risen when Red Thornton stormed into the garage, his face twisted in fury. His men were scrambling, panicked. Two of them were missing, knocked out cold in the back room. The gas supply, leaking. 3 of their bikes, smashed. And worst of all, one of the crates had been tampered with. Red opened the lid, his nostrils flaring as he saw a single bullet resting on top of the rifles. Next to it, a note. It read, "Not so fun when someone fights back, huh? See you soon. The Marine." Red's hand shook with fury. Then he did something none of his men had ever seen before. He laughed. A deep, dark, dangerous laugh. Then he crushed the note in his fist. "All right," he muttered. "Now it's a fight." And it wouldn't end until one of them was buried. The devil strikes back. The morning air in Hollowbrook Heights was crisp, but the storm brewing underneath was anything but calm. Darius sat at the dining table, methodically cleaning his old Marine-issue Ka Bauer knife. His movements were steady, his eyes focused. He had spent years doing this, preparing for battle, making sure his gear was just right. But this wasn't a foreign battlefield. This was home, and war had come knocking. Across the table, Malik leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee like it was just another normal morning. It wasn't. Monique sat on the couch, still in her robe, scrolling through her phone. She hadn't said much since last night, but the way she kept checking the window, the way her jaw was clenched. Darius knew she felt it too. Something was coming. Then her phone buzzed. Her face drained of color. "What is it?" Darius asked, already standing. Monique swallowed, turning the screen toward him. A news article. Breaking audios. Armed ro BBRY at local bakery. Odulinear in suretical condition. The cold hard weight dropped in Darius's stomach. Mr. Henderson. 20 minutes later, the hospital. Darius stormed through the emergency room doors, rage boiling just beneath his skin. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, the beeping of machines, the muffled sounds of nurses rushing past. But all he could focus on was the small, frail figure lying in the hospital bed ahead. Mr. Henderson looked bad. His face was swollen, one eye completely shut. His arm was wrapped in thick bandages, and there were bruises covering his chest and neck. He looked like he had been through hell. Standing beside the bed was his granddaughter, Naomi. Tears stained her cheeks, but her eyes were hard. She saw Darius and Malik step inside, and her expression twisted in anger. "You said you were going to fix this," Naomi hissed, her voice raw. "And now look what happened." Darius clenched his jaw. "What happened?" Naomi wiped her face, taking a shaky breath. "Two guys came in this morning. Black helmets. Guns. They tore the place apart. Beat my grandpa half to death. Took everything." Malik swore under his breath. Darius stepped closer, his voice low. "Did they say anything?" Naomi nodded, her hands shaking. One of them leaned down and said, "Tell the Marine this is just the beginning." The words burned in Darius's mind. Malik crossed his arms. "They're pushing us." Darius's fists clenched. No, they weren't just pushing. They were making this personal. And that meant one thing. They had made a mistake. Darius turned toward the door. "Malik, let's go." Naomi's voice was sharp. "Where are you going?" Darius didn't stop. "To end this." The setup. They didn't go home. Instead, they drove straight to the Hollowbrook Heights police station. Darius marched inside, past the front desk, straight toward Detective Johnson. The detective looked up, surprised. "Carter, what the hell?" Darius slammed a folder onto his desk. "The Hell Mask Riders just put an old man in the hospital. I gave you everything you needed to stop them. You ignored it. Now it's blood on your hands." Johnson sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, Carter." "No," Darius growled. "You look. I'm not asking anymore. I'm telling you. If you don't stop them, I will." Johnson studied him for a long moment. Then he exhaled and opened the folder. Inside were printed out photos from the night before. Security footage from the garage. Evidence. Proof. And right in the center, a list of names. Everything Darius and Malik had gathered. Johnson let out a low whistle. "You really did your homework." Darius's voice was ice. "Are you going to act on it, or do I need to make a mess?" The detective met his eyes. "We'll handle it." But Darius saw the hesitation, the reluctance. He leaned in, his voice a deadly whisper. "I've been fighting people like them for years. If you think I'll just sit back and let this happen, you don't know a damn thing about me." Johnson nodded slowly. "I'll see what I can do." Darius wasn't satisfied, but it was enough for now. The trap. Darius and Malik weren't done. They had a plan. Red Thornton thought he was in control. That was about to change. Darius placed a call to an old contact, someone who owed him a favor. A little bait. Word was spread through the underground. A shipment of cash was moving through town. Unprotected. Easy pickings. And Darius knew exactly who would take the bait. The Hell Mask Riders. The ambush. Midnight. The shipment wasn't real. But the trap. Oh, that was very real. Darius and Malik positioned themselves in an abandoned warehouse near the docks, hidden in the shadows. The place was rigged, cameras, traps, and exit strategy. The Hell Mask Riders arrived right on time. 5 of them, including Red. The gang leader stepped out of his truck, his eyes scanning the area. "Something don't feel right," he muttered. Too late. Darius stepped out of the darkness, his gun raised. "Evening, boys." Chaos erupted. Malik took out the first biker with a precise takedown, wrenching his arm behind his back. The second reached for his gun. Darius was faster. One punch, the biker dropped like a sack of bricks. Red cursed, drawing his own weapon. But before he could aim, Malik had a knife to his throat. "Don't," Malik growled. Red's eyes burned with rage, but he froze. Darius stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "I warned you," he said. "I gave you a chance to walk away." Red spat blood, glaring. "You think this is over?" Darius grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against a crate. "No," he said coldly. "I think you're over." The sound of police sirens filled the air. Red's eyes widened. "You called the cops. You're gonna let them handle it." Darius smirked. "No," he said. "I just wanted to make sure you got arrested while looking like a bitch." The police swarmed in, taking the gang down without a fight. Red's face twisted in fury as he was shoved into the back of a squad car. "You think this ends with me?" he shouted. "There's always someone bigger. You'll never be safe." Darius leaned in. "Neither will you." Red's face paled. Because Darius wasn't done. He had one more favor to cash in. And Red Thornton. He wasn't going to last long behind bars. The next morning, Monique hugged Darius tight. "Is it over?" she whispered. Darius exhaled, holding her close. "For now." She pulled back, studying his face. "You're not done, are you?" Darius looked toward the horizon. "No," he said softly. "Not until this town is safe. No mercy, no fear." The Hell Mask Riders were finished. Their leader, Red Thornton, was sitting in a high-security holding cell, stripped of his power, awaiting federal charges that would keep him locked away for decades. The police had confiscated weapons, drugs, and stacks of dirty money from the gang's operations. Hollowbrook Heights should have felt safe again. But it didn't. Because Darius Carter knew something the police didn't. Red Thornton wasn't the real power behind the Hell Mask Riders. He was just the face. The real monster was still out there. And now, that monster knew Darius by name. 48 hours later, a storm on the horizon. Darius sat at his kitchen table, rolling a bullet between his fingers. The house was silent, the kind of silence that felt heavy. Monique was at the Fredericks house across the street, safer there while things settled. Malik had gone home for now, but they both knew this wasn't over. The news had already moved on from the Hell Mask Riders, but the streets hadn't. There were still whispers in the dark, shadows that didn't feel right. Darius's instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive in combat zones, were screaming at him. Then his phone buzzed, a blocked number. He answered. A voice crackled through the line, low, measured, and dripping with malice. "You should have let things be, Marine." Darius didn't blink. "You should have kept your men under control," he said evenly. A slow, sinister chuckle. "They weren't my men. Not really. Red? He was just a dog I kept on a leash." Darius leaned forward. "And who the hell are you?" A pause. Then the voice said a name. Vincent Dalka. Darius's grip tightened around the phone. He knew that name. Dalka wasn't just another biker thug. He was a ghost, a power broker who ran multiple gangs from behind the scenes. Drugs, arms trafficking, contract killings. He didn't get his hands dirty. He paid others to do it for him. And now, he had just put a target on Darius's back. "You think you won," Dalka continued, his voice smooth. "But you only cut off a branch. You still haven't touched the root." Darius exhaled slowly. "So what now? You send more goons after me?" Dalka chuckled. "Oh no, not after you. Darius's blood turned to ice. Dalka wasn't coming for him. He was coming for Monique. Darius hung up and was already moving. Across the street. The attack begins. Monique sat on the Frederick's couch, trying to focus on the movie playing on TV. But something felt off. The lights flickered. Mrs. Frederick, sitting beside her, frowned. That's strange. Power's been fine all day. Mr. Frederick, standing by the window, stiffened. Someone's outside. Monique's breath caught in her throat. Darius said to call him if anything feels off. She reached for her phone. Then the front door exploded inward. Two men in black combat gear stormed inside. One grabbed Mrs. Frederick, slamming her to the floor. The other lunged for Monique. She barely had time to scream before a gloved hand clamped over her mouth. Darkness closed in as they dragged her outside. Darius Carter was death in motion. The moment Darius saw the masked men pulling Monique toward a black van, he stopped thinking. He moved. His boots pounded the pavement as he tore across the street, a roaring storm of violence. The first attacker barely had time to turn before Darius's elbow shattered his nose. The second reached for his gun. Too slow. Darius ripped his arm back, dislocating the shoulder with a sickening thump. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. Darius didn't stop, didn't hesitate. He grabbed the edge of the van's sliding door just as it started to close and yanked it back open. Inside, a third man held a knife to Monique's throat. Darius met his eyes. The man hesitated. Big mistake. Darius shot forward like a bullet, grabbing the attacker's wrist and slamming it against the van's interior wall. The knife clattered to the floor. Monique kicked the man in the stomach, giving Darius just enough room to cry. One brutal punch put the man down. The driver revved the engine, trying to speed off. Darius reached inside, grabbed him by the collar, and yanked him halfway out of his seat. The van veered, tires screeching, then slammed into a streetlight. Smoke filled the air. The fight was over, but Darius wasn't done. The aftermath. A declaration of war. The police arrived minutes later, responding to the chaos. Darius didn't leave Monique's side. Her hands were still shaking, but she was alive. He turned toward the masked men being dragged into police cars. One of them, still conscious, glared at him. "You think this is over?" he spat. Darius stepped forward, his voice low. "No." Then he grabbed the man by the collar and whispered something into his ear. The thug's face drained of color. He didn't say another word. As the police pulled away, Malik's car screeched to a stop in front of the house. He got out, eyes wide. What the hell happened? Darius turned toward him. His voice was steel. "They tried to take Monique." Malik's hands curled into fists. "Where's the boss behind this?" Darius exhaled. "Vincent Dalka." Malik's face darkened. "That bastard runs the whole operation. You don't take him to court. You take him to the grave." Darius nodded. He already knew what had to be done. Because this wasn't just a gang anymore. This was organized crime, and there was only one way to end people like Dalka. No courts, no arrests, no deals. Darius wasn't going to fight this war in the shadows anymore. He was going to burn them all down. No mercy, no fear. Darius Carter had spent his life fighting wars for his country. Now he was fighting a war for his home. The difference? This time, there were no rules. Midnight, the last war begins. The Hell Mask Riders were gone. But Vincent Dalka, the man behind the gang, the true mastermind, was still alive. And as long as he was alive, Monique wasn't safe. Neither was Hollowbrook Heights, so Darius wasn't going to wait. He wasn't going to react. He was going to hunt. The plan. Darius stood in the basement of Malik's house, surrounded by maps, weapons, and notes. Malik leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So what's the move? Darius pointed at a warehouse on the east side of town. That's where Dalka is, he said. I did some digging. He owns it under a shell company, uses it for arms smuggling. Malik smirked. You sure? Darius pulled out security footage. It showed a black car arriving at the warehouse, Dalka stepping out, armed guards standing nearby. I'm sure, Darius said. Malik let out a low whistle. Damn, you really did your homework. Darius tightened the bulletproof vest over his chest. I don't take chances. Malik's smirk widened. That's why I'm with you. They grabbed their weapons. It was time. The warehouse. The final battle. The building loomed in the night, its high fences and security cameras making it look like a damn fortress. Malik and Darius crouched behind an abandoned truck a block away. I count 6 guards outside, Malik whispered. More inside, Darius added. Dalka's in the office on the top floor. Malik grinned. So what's the plan? Sneak in. Darius shook his head. No. Malik raised an eyebrow. No. Darius pulled a grenade from his bag. We go loud. The explosion. The grenade soared through the air, landing near a cluster of guards. A second later. Boom. Flames erupted. Panic spread. The guards scrambled, trying to figure out what the hell had just happened. And by the time they did, Darius and Malik were already moving. Crack. Darius shot one guard in the knee, sending him collapsing with a scream. Malik took down another with a swift knife strike to the throat. Gunfire erupted, but Darius was faster, deadlier. He weaved through the chaos, a storm of bullets and destruction. A guard rushed him. Darius grabbed the man's wrist, twisted, and snapped it like a twig. Another tried to flank him. Malik put a bullet between his eyes. Within 2 minutes, the outside was clear. Darius turned toward the warehouse doors. Dalka's inside. Malik reloaded his pistol. Let's finish this. Inside the warehouse, the monster's den. The air was thick with gunpowder and smoke. Rows of crates stacked high, filled with illegal weapons, stolen goods, drugs. A multi-million-dollar empire. Dalka's empire. Footsteps echoed above them. Darius's eyes snapped upward. The top-floor office. A shadow moved behind the glass. Dalka was watching them. Waiting. Daring them. Darius didn't hesitate. He sprinted for the staircase, taking 2 steps at a time. Malik covered him, taking out the last 2 guards. Darius kicked the door open. And there he was. Vincent Dalka. Sitting behind his desk, a gun resting casually in his hands. He didn't even look scared. He just smiled. I was wondering when you'd get here. The final confrontation. Darius stepped forward, his own gun trained on Dalka's head. This ends tonight, he said. Dalka smirked. Does it? He gestured toward the crates of guns and cash. You really think this matters? You really think taking me out changes anything? Darius didn't answer. Dalka leaned back, completely relaxed. There's always someone ready to take my place. You kill me. Another man steps in. You destroy my business. Someone else picks it up. His smile widened. You can't kill a system marine. Darius pulled the hammer back on his gun. No, he said coldly. But I can kill you. Dalka's smirk faltered. For the first time, he saw it. Saw the truth. Darius Carter wasn't bluffing. He was done talking. Dalka reached for his gun. Bang. A single shot. Dalka's head snapped back. His body slumped in the chair. Blood trickled down the side of his face, his lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. It was over. The fire that erased everything. Darius and Malik didn't just leave. They burned it all down. The warehouse. The weapons. The legacy of Vincent Dalka. Gone. As the flames roared into the night sky, Darius stood there, watching the empire he had just destroyed. Malik exhaled. Damn, man. Darius turned to him. Time to go home. Epilogue. Peace comes at a price. 2 weeks later, Hollowbrook Heights was quiet. For the first time in years, people walked the streets without fear. The bikers were gone. Dalka's network was destroyed. Darius stood on his porch, watching Monique laugh with the Fredericks across the street. She looked happy. Safe. That was all that mattered. Malik pulled up in his car, stepping out with a smirk. You actually look relaxed for once. Darius chuckled. Don't get used to it. Malik leaned against the porch railing. So, what now? Darius glanced toward the horizon. Hollowbrook Heights was safe. But the world still had monsters. Still had people like Dalka. Darius had spent too long fighting wars for other people. Now maybe it was time to fight one for himself. Maybe it was time to hunt. He looked at Malik. You up for another mission? Malik grinned. Thought you'd never ask. Darius smirked. Then he turned, stepping into the house. Ready for whatever came next. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun.